When it comes to fundraising, the biggest thing I can say, especially through social media, is transparency is your best friend. Be transparent. Tell them you need $100,000. If that's what you need and that's the goal, and you have ways to get from point A to point B to ultimately C, then you got to be transparent. And I think that really helped me. I did not hold back. We wanted to see FCA through and through and be so successful. But the only way that that was going to happen was having one major component, and that's money. And people hate talking about money, Tayloe. But this is why you have a podcast on money, because we need to be better educated about it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mission Money Fundraising Podcast. I'm your host, Tayloe Clements, and I'm so excited you are here. Today, we have a really special guest, Brooke. She's been a friend of mine for a long time now. We work together at Fellowship of Christian Athletes. She's been raising her funds for the last 10 years, and she's really mastered the art of fundraising using Facebook and Instagram. So that's what we're diving into today. Brooke, thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so excited that you are doing this podcast. I think it's going to help a lot of people reach a lot of different audiences. So I'm all about it.
Thanks. Well, just so excited to learn from you even more. I know just talking with you about fundraising, been so encouraged to hear how much success you've had from social media and how you're kind of like, I think there was a lot of pressure to not go with social media and to raise funds in person. And you didn't have that option. So you decided to go through social media to raise a majority of your funds. So tell me a little bit about that and give the audience here an introduction about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, of course. So like Tayloe said, my name is Brooke, and we did meet through an FCA. I think it was a new staff training. Gosh, I don't know, four years ago, maybe 5 now.
Wow.
And yeah, my fundraising journey started at 13 when I applied to my first mission trip to Thailand to work in the red light district. And so that was my very first introduction, not knowing at the time it would catapult me into living in Los Angeles, volunteering at a leadership school for this place called the Dream Center, which was a giant outreach nonprofit. I was there for 2 years, fundraising my tuition, and then that led me to the World Race in 2017, which was 11 months, 11 countries, fundraising the entire trip for the year. And then eventually that led me to my 5-year career with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, where you do fundraise. If you're a full-time staff, you fundraise your entire salary. So that is kind of the timeline from 2013 to 2019 when I started with FCA. So those pivotal 6 years is really when I figured out, social media would be my platform. But then I had to tweak it when I got into FCA, because FCA had a different strategy of fundraising, and it was not to use social media as much as I was using it. I was very much, person-to-person contact, making those individual touch points. But for me, that strategy just was not the right pivotal move. And that was for several factors. A lot of that was environment where I was living. People are busy and they don't want to always sit down after a work day, or they have to take their kids to an extracurricular activity. So me coming in and being like, hey, I need money, they definitely paused the button. So that's when I really just, went to what I knew from the previous years and figured out all sorts of things in social media.
That's wild. And didn't you do the math? How much did you total that you raised over how many years?
Between just my 2 years in LA and my 1 year overseas for the world race was close to $35,000. And those were back to back. Some overlap there. Those seasons were more just like a one time, right? Like you're going on a mission trip. But I mean, $35,000 in nearly 3 years, that was a big undertaking. And then, FCA being a salary where you constantly have to do it. I think my numbers had totaled between my salary and what I needed to fundraise to keep the entire FCA going in my town that I was living at the time. was close to $80,000 a year. So I'm taking two different types of seasons, right? One is needing permanent funds. The others are really quick 1 point, checkpoints, and then trying to take my knowledge from both to make sure that I secure my job with FCA.
Wow. Yeah. Paint the picture for us. I mean, I think a lot of people listening are kind of all over the map, right? You have someone raising their funds as a solo fundraiser, raising their salary like you are. Maybe they're a part of Young Life or FCA, all the way up to a nonprofit. But this was just you. So, right, how old were you? You decided to kind of take on this, going on a missions trip, raising this money for a year. How did you start to get into it? And this was only you, right?
Yeah, this was only me. It really just started, back in 2013. I think I was 21, or 20 when I went overseas to Thailand. So I had some family and friends that had gotten into some mission trips. So I just one day, literally in Google, I just told the story to a friend the other day too. I put in, mission trips, and this organization called Adventures in Missions popped up, and they had all different kinds of trips. And most people, when they first go on a mission trip, they're going for 1 week to build houses in Mexico, right? That's usually the typical 1 week standard. But I found a trip that was 2 months long. It was called a passport trip. And so I was 20 years old, and they had an opportunity to go to Thailand, straight to the red light district, working, rescuing women out of human trafficking and giving them a job at the cafe. But what's interesting is when I was over there, I met a group of people that they had these backpacks, and they were also at the cafe. And I was like, what are you guys doing? And they were like, we're world racers. We are also from Adventures in Missions organization. And so the world race is basically, you have Adventures in Missions as your umbrella, and underneath there are different trips. So I was taking the passport trip for 2 months, and then over here you have the world race. And that was 11 months, 11 countries. And I was just fascinated with that idea. And I was like, I'm going to do that one day. Don't know when, and for sure don't know how. So then, fast forward to 2014, that's when I moved to Los Angeles and started raising funds to be a part of the leadership school. And I did that, raised the funds, I applied for my second year. I got accepted in August. And then in September of 2015, just started my second year fundraising tuition. I think I was still paying off my first year tuition, just had like one more deadline. So I was already overlapping my first and second year. And then I decided to apply for the world race, and I got
Wow.
accepted.
Oh, that's
So then I
amazing.
had to start fundraising that deadline as well. And then I left the country in 2016.
Wow. What an adventure, right? And then right into
Yeah.
FCA.
Yeah. Yep. And then, after the world race, I got home in 2017. And then 2019, I moved to Ridgecrest, California, for Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and having no idea, what all of that would entail.
Yeah, something you told me, 4 or 5 years ago was being on the West Coast. A lot of people are really busy, right? And so, like you said a second ago, people didn't have the time maybe to meet in person. So you kind of creative problem solved to figure out how to raise your salary in that location, right? I think that
Yeah.
it probably is a lot different than someone in the Bible Belt or someone down south or someone in a place that life is a little slower. Do you think that's true? And is that why you chose social media as a main fundraising platform?
Yeah, I think there were a couple different factors. I think one of those you touched on is the cultural difference, especially when it comes to the church world of things, right? Like the West Coast, we operate differently over here. I feel like in the South, when people ask for money, it's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing the Lord's work." It's like, boom, $1,000, right? Here, it's like, why do you need money? Go get a real job, right? Like the stereotypes. And so that's when I just decided, like, how do we break the stereotypes? Whether you are fundraising for something of a faith-based nonprofit, you're fundraising for your job, right? In the secular world, like there's a lot of stereotypes. And so I was faced with your typical, faith-based stereotype. And then the other aspect of that was I had one conversation with my boss at the time, and I'm sure if FCA people listen to this, they'll be like, you did what? But And just for transparency reasons, and I see their point, right? They really wanted that personal touch. For me, I had one conversation with my boss, and he said, look, technically you should not even be starting ministry until you are fully funded, which meant your salary times X amount of months plus your ministry expenses times, comes up with this magical number. And he said, but I also understand that FCA is non-existent where you're at, basically. I mean, he had started some roots and tried to get it going. But he's like, people will not invest if they don't know what to invest in. So he said, because you have a background in fundraising, right? Done the World Race, LA. He said, I'll let you do both. I'll let you start your job and start ministry while you parallel fundraising at the same time. And so that's when I turned to social media for kind of that quickness of getting the word out there. I didn't have time to meet with people, and people didn't have time to meet with me. So it was like, I have deadlines. But at the same time, I also had the freedom because I can post on social media about my needs financially, but then I can go and make ministry rather than setting aside a time to meet with a person that's taking away my time to go do the ministry, right? So instead of choosing, he let me do both. And I really, really think that is where we built the foundation for 5 years of successfully fundraising through social media, purely alone, word of mouth. That is it. Tayloe. It's just crazy.
Wow, that's just amazing. And I love that, you boldly kind of managed both, right? I mean, obviously you'd already kind of been raising some funds using social, but let's say someone's listening and, they've been told that in-person fundraising is the only way to do it, right? What would you tell that person considering to take on social media for the first time, or they're starting to get interested in using a different digital platform? What's your advice to them? How would you encourage them?
Let's shatter the myths, right? Like, this is what I'm all about, just providing the truth. And there's nothing wrong with people thinking that there's only one way, right? Like, I don't harbor any sort of, they're going off of experience. FCA was going off of statistics that they had seen, and that's smart. But they weren't taking into consideration different environments and different areas, right? And so, and just because social media is through a screen does not mean it can't be personable. And
Yeah,
a
I
lot
love
of
that.
a lot of my friendships, they're long distance. I have a lot of friends in Canada, and you know how we connect? We connect through a screen, through a FaceTime. That's all we have. Or we're talking to each other through Instagram. I can't just go and have coffee with them when I get off work. So we have to connect through social media or through a screen. And so I think just like shatter that stereotype, try something new, try something different. And if we're even talking about now, it's 2024. So this was 2019. I mean, think about all the more resources and platforms there are just even within the 6-year time frame that I started FCA to now. Now you have Threads and TikTok and LinkedIn, right? Like Snapchat, like all of those things. I think that also shattering the myth of like social media is bad. Yes, there are bad parts to it, but there are really, really good parts to it. And you just have to know how to utilize it. And I think that's really it. It's trial and error. I remember when I first started with FCA, I was doing like hour-long live feeds. Then people, through feedback, they're like, yo, that's so long to sit down on a computer for an hour. Like, we only have this amount of time we want to listen to you. So I shorten it. And I'd go as short as 2 minutes. I'd give my whole FCA update in 2 minutes, pitch the financial need, leave it there, and then, the rest would fall into place.
Yeah, you would. That's just so incredible. I mean, that's what I teach people too, trial and error, right?
Right.
As I'm
Yeah.
deciding to step out into this podcast, it's really just getting it out there, right? Just starting it and just saying, okay, hey, here's where we're at. This is what we have, and we're gonna grow from here. But you have to pick the place to start on social. And if you don't start, you're not gonna get anywhere. I know that if you were fundraising for 5 years, or 10 years, but for FCA, you're fundraising for your career, for your salary, large amounts. You had to get creative at some point too, right? And I've
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
some of the things you've done, but our audience hasn't. Tell me some of the ways you got creative in your fundraising through social media?
Sure. Classic things like, the buy a box, buy an envelope. I've seen that done a lot. I've done pie me in the face, right? Jump on a live feed in 5 minutes. I gotta raise
I
a
love
hundred
that.
bucks, like purchase a pie for $10, right? And like, obviously with FC, it was a different perspective because I had to do it permanently, right? Like I always needed funds for the ministry. So the quickness of those creative things were more so for the season of like LA, Thailand, but for FCA, it was just like a lot of live feed. And I noticed this too, people did not want to read my emails. Like they
Interesting.
did not read my newsletters, and I had statistics pull from that, and I was using campaigning letters and they weren't opening. So I took that exact information, sat myself in front of a computer, did a live feed, and I would stay on and I'd let people ask questions. Hey, Brooke, how much do you need? And I would just share. And when it comes to fundraising, the biggest thing I can say, especially through social media, is transparency is your best friend. Be transparent. Tell them you need $100,000. If that's what you need and that's the goal, and you have ways to get from point A to point B to ultimately C, then you got to be transparent. And I think that really helped me. I did not hold back. Like we wanted to see FCA through and through and be so successful. But the only way that that was going to happen was having one major component, and that's money. And people
Right.
hate talking about money, Tayloe. But this is why you have a podcast on money, because we need to be better educated about it, especially when it comes to raising funds.
Yeah, listeners, if you didn't just hear that, or maybe you did hear that, I encourage you to go back and re-listen. I think you hit on a lot of key things there. First is transparency. The second is, yes, I want to dive in more on just, yeah, people aren't talking about money or they're fearful to talk about it. How can we start those conversations and be bold? But the first one, though, I want to touch back on this. Did you get pied in the face? That's what I want to know. Did you
Oh
say in
yeah.
front of a live stream?
For sure, for sure. I think that year I was fundraising in between my second year and the world race. So I was about to leave the country. And yeah, I had some friends set me up on my camera, like on my phone, got a trash bag, went to Dollar Tree, whipped cream, the whole thing. And they commented, like they spoke on my live feed. They're like, Brooke's leaving the country,
Love
and it
that.
it just yeah, yeah. And it didn't stop there. I remember when I left the country, I had a deadline because I continued to raise funds throughout the world race. Because if you weren't fully funded, you did have the opportunity. You just had very strict deadlines. And we're in the Chicago airport. I just left the country for a year, like day one of the world race. And three of us had a financial deadline. So the three of us in the airport in the middle of our 17-hour layover made a video. And it was the like most cheesiest video. It was like, pretending like we're in a Jeep in Africa and we're like doing this in the middle of the airport. But
Love it.
through that video, we were able to raise some support for all three of us, which was great.
I love your ability to be bold and transparent and to ask, right? And so, last thing you touched on there was money, right? I mean, I think it's pretty big for someone to say, I mean, I can just imagine you saying, yeah, I'm going to sign up for the world race, or I'm going to sign up to do the Dream Center and I'm going to raise this amount of money, never doing it before, right? I think there's a lot the listeners here can learn from you about the boldness, stepping out into that as one solo person, raising your funds to going, yeah, I'm going to go do this thing that I'm getting called to do. Once I launched this podcast, someone reached out like, hey, I want to start this amazing thing, and I'd have to raise my support. And, I don't know anyone that would want to give to me. Who would want to? I don't want to ask for it. I don't want to talk about money. I don't want to ask for funds, right? What would you tell that person that's scared to talk about money, hasn't been a part of the culture, and now they're going from 0 to 100 and having to raise support?
I really want to touch on like let's get down to practical, right? Like I could tell you some typical like, oh, don't be fearful. But the reality is, like, especially in America, we are not open people. We're very private, right? And so especially when it comes to touchy things like money, it's okay to be intimidated, and it's okay to have no idea where to start. And I think that's what's so great about your podcast is you are providing those answers to those types of questions. And so, a few things that I learned was ask anybody and everybody because you never know who's listening to your story. People that you think will give will not, and people that you don't think will give or invest will. And change your mindset. You are physically asking for money, right? That like you have a financial goal. But I think the shift I saw that was really positive for me, that people really felt a part of a team. They felt a part of my journey for years. I had one donor all through 3 of those seasons, World Race, Dream Center, actually 4 seasons FCA, and she gave every single time. And it's because she saw the giving as an investment. And so to that person that asked you that question, my encouragement to them specifically would be think when every time you ask someone to help you reach a financial goal, you're asking them to make an investment into you or into, whatever you're fundraising for, because money in a sense does make the world go round. You need it to buy groceries, you need it to provide for your bills, and you do need it for you to be on the field, whether it's a mission trip, a nonprofit, I mean, look at the business world. These people, right, on Wall Street, right, they're in meetings all the time making pitches to get money. The difference is we don't associate that the same in the mission world. We think that there's some sort of negative connotation. Look at me, I'm poor, I need your money to survive. And you gotta shatter that. Like, you need their money to help you make an investment. You're just the one on the field doing it, but you need your financial teammates to partner. It's a partnership. That's really what it comes down to. It's a financial partnership.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. It really is. I think one time, or in my first podcast, I touched on this with it's not about you, it's about them. And to take the focus off it being about me, and my rejection, and how do we get past that and to put ourselves out there and really be bold and know that we're actually inviting people in to make an impact, which is kind of awesome, you know?
Yeah. And there's nothing greater that people want than that satisfaction that they've done something good in the world. And the world is chaotic and it's messy. And so people want to make a difference. And sometimes like myself, I was used because I was called to make that difference, but I couldn't make that difference unless I had the finances. And yes, you need your people over here. You need your volunteers. Like every piece is moving, whatever you're fundraising for. But at the end of the day, things would not move for me in FCA. Like I would not get paid. Or also I couldn't provide pizza. I couldn't provide Bibles. I couldn't put on an event unless there was financial means. And people do understand that because they understand you need money to do everything, right? If I go to the grocery store, I can't walk out with my groceries. I got to pay for them. And to pay for them, I need money. And it's the same thing. And I think that's what I would share with people when I was trying to grow FCA. We were so small in Ridgecrest, and I had a big vision, but we couldn't get there without the money. And I think people did. I don't think, I do know, because we ended up doing it. We saw people get hungry for more. And that's where the fire got lit. It was like, Brooke, we want to see you put on a Fields of Faith event. Okay, well, I can't do anything unless there's money. Oh, you need money? How can I help? That's how the conversations would change. Was
Wow.
they started wanting to see the things that we were passionate about as a team. So it's all about casting your vision, right, Tayloe? Like you got to cast it and you have to bring people on board with the vision. If they don't understand the vision and they don't understand where you're going, they won't invest.
Preach it. Exactly, exactly. I love that. And I love that you would share your vision and that it really got people behind it. How did you do that on social media, right? You're maybe not one-on-one. How did you share that vision across your videos and your campaigns? I'd love for you to dive into that because I can't agree more that that is so key to really moving the hearts of potential donors.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of had a system. System would usually start out with, I had a team of volunteers. Shout out to all my volunteers during that season of life. They're amazing. A huge reason why FCA and Ridgecrest grew. So we would have a meeting about once a month. We'd, I would come in, I'd be like, hey, here's the vision. I'm the staff, right? So I'm responsible for making sure X, Y, and Z happens. They are the volunteers to going out on the field with me. And I'm just bringing them the backbone of FCA. From there, I'd create, let's say, Canva. I love Canva. Canva's great. Like, if you're
Yes,
not using
great tool.
Canva, you got to get a pro subscription and start using that.
Hey, we're not
So I
sponsored by them. It's a great plug.
there we go. Sponsor this podcast. I love it. Canva's great. So I would take, a picture of the whiteboard with the vision, and I'd make a Canva, let's say just a Facebook flyer. I'd put it on our FCA page. I'd say, hey, great meeting with the volunteers. Look at our vision. And here's how we want to meet bullet point number 3. By December, 2021, we want to be able to provide 50 Bibles. Well, each Bible's $14. So we're going to raise some money for Bibles. I would bring them a visual presentation. People can listen all day long, but they want to see too. Some people like myself were visual learners, so they want to have a practical side. The other piece of that was, I really think the live feeds were my strong point, because you do the live feed, right? You see you have so many viewers, and then you usually end it and you're done. Not knowing who was listening, they would catch me at the street, or like in softball when I was coaching. I had no idea that some of my softball parents were like, hey, Brooke, we know that FCA has a softball camp. You are watching my live feed and how we want to send kids. Can your daughters go? And so, you really never know who's listening, who is your audience. And that came from, really, for me, was the live feed on Instagram and Facebook, but even knowing the algorithms, right? Like, I started to get super techy, like, you can break it. Instagram and Facebook, like every social media platform has algorithms, and you have to figure out how to manipulate the algorithm. And if you can figure that out, then you will be able to build a successful platform through your social media. So I was kind of troubleshooting, like, what's working on Instagram, and then I'd take it to Facebook, because I had 2 different audiences. Facebook was for my donors. Instagram was for my coaches, for my kids. And so learning to play with those, and then also reaching out to people in the marketing world. I think I had reached out to you at one point, like early on, after our training. I reached out to a person that literally had been doing marketing at our church for 15 years. And she helped me figure out how to design Canva things. And simplicity is key. Less is always more.
Yeah, I love, there's a couple things that you touched on there that are so good. One is, staying on top of the algorithm is so key because, and you said it well, we really just have to test, fail and then succeed and figure out what works, what doesn't for our audience, because it's always so different and so unique. So it's so important to use trial and error and to learn from other people. There's also great resources out there. What I'll do is I'll just follow a lot of influencers, like you said, that are really up to date on everything. Social media world is another great resource. Just staying, signing up for those emails, figuring out, hey, what is Instagram releasing? The one thing that I have found being the most successful for social too is, and I don't know if you've seen this, but if social media releases something like Go Live or Threads or IGTV or something like that, if you jump on that, they want to see those things succeed. So the content you post there is going to succeed too.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think about Facebook, right? Like, you are not seeing, let's say you have 700 friends, you're not seeing all 700 posts. The algorithm is, you're only going to see what you like. So let's say I always like your post, Tayloe, always. My algorithm is going to start filtering out the people that I don't ever like. And then I wonder where they go. I mean, that is just, it's pure genius, right? Like, when you get into the nitty gritty, like you were talking about, it really is genius. But social media is only going to grow more powerful. I mean, now we're dealing with AI agents. We're dealing with all these different components. So you really have to put in the homework if you're going to fundraise like myself through social media. You really have to utilize those resources, and some of those you named, and those are great resources. Everything is at our fingertips, so why not take advantage of what we have?
Yeah, exactly. It really is. And it's a whole new world out there. And
Yeah.
you're not on digital, go get on it, right? I'm sure a lot of people listening are, they're interested. And so I love how you've just continued to press and learn. I'm sure in the process you've had challenges and obstacles. Do you know, or can you share a specific obstacle you've had and have overcome using digital, fundraising? Explain that and explain, how you overcame that obstacle.
I think one obstacle, well, there's two that I'm thinking of. I'm thinking from the tech side, right? Like strong Wi-Fi data, invest in a good phone. I'm not saying you have to have the top of the notch, like brand new every single time, but you want to have something that you feel confident when you post your content that your video is strong and it's not pixelated. I think that was a hurdle that in the very beginning, I had to learn. Like my pictures were just terrible. And I don't have to be a professional photographer, but it was just what is pleasing to the eye when you're on social media, because even though we may think in person something looks great, well, our audience is never going to see that because they're sitting behind a screen. So learn how to take a photo. I mean, I was at FCA camp in 2019. And I remember my boss said, okay, we're going to go around and video all of the campers from our area. Make sure you hold the camera this way. And I was like, well, why does that matter? Right. But it did. It matters. And that's when I learned that. And then right now you have a 0.5, like all the teenagers are like, you get that 0.5 view of me. And, like learning those things. And I think the second hurdle is through social media, because you're not sitting down in person. They can't, especially if you're just doing a post, they can't see the raw emotion. Um, so that does bring some challenges in the sense of like, well, Brooke, I don't understand. You just asked for $14,000 yesterday. Like, and they'll, share a comment on Facebook, and you have to know, at least for me in those moments, that you are having a professional social media presence. I can't put my personal opinion out there. I have to put my professional opinion out there. And you have to separate those. And I would even say, like, if you're going to utilize digital fundraising, and let's just say that digital, that is social media, separate yourself, personal and professional. And I stopped posting a lot of different things for the 5 years that I was in FCA because my donors followed my journey through social media. And I'm not saying, of course, take this with a grain of salt, right? This is what the podcast is all my perspective and my opinions that I've learned. But for those 5 years on my personal page, I stopped talking about politics. Like I took my opinions out of it because I was now fundraising on social media through a huge nonprofit with 3,000 staff. So my donors wanted to follow me on my personal page. And what they would see on my personal page would dictate if they would invest on my professional page. They hold the power. And I know some people don't agree with that, but you really, when you're fundraising, you are at the mercy of other people. So you do have to learn to discern how you're going to not only be professionally on social media, but personally. Now, if you're going to step into that, I hope that makes sense.
It totally does. I think that's really well said and so true, especially for solo fundraisers. And I think that's exactly who this podcast is for, is someone that's raising their own support or starting a mission and, starting from the ground up, right? Or they've been in it for a long time, but they are part of that, being that frontward facing person that's asking for donations. It's so key to make sure that you are the face of your organization. You are the face of that mission. And so I love that. Well said. And you touched on so many practical things in there, whether it was just having a good phone, that you're comfortable with the content quality. I was looking the other day, I'm like, okay, which iPhones get 4K and up? It's like almost like
Right.
iPhone 10 or 8 and up. So it really doesn't have to be the newest thing to have really great quality content. You mentioned Canva. I love that. Great for
Yeah.
graphic creation. Any other practical tools and tips if someone's wanting to get started right now, like you did on social and using that as a fundraising tool? Any other practical tips or tricks that you would give them to get started?
Yeah. Like I said, Canva is my biggest one. Some other ones that have worked, obviously you can pay for an ad. I would not drop personally hundreds of dollars right off the bat. Try literally $1 and see what happens. And then if you don't get the results, right, try $5, like up it a little bit. We played with ads on Facebook a lot. So that was really fun if you have the financial capability. And this is where I think people, sometimes tune their ears the other way it is true. It's cliche what I'm about to say, but in order to make money, you got to spend money. And I had to invest in the ads to get the return. And out of the return, I'd get one donor. And so you do have to spend money. And I think maybe, again, if there's some former FCA staff listening to this, I'm going to ruffle some more feathers. But, I would spend money that was not in the budget per se. I'd use my personal funds and not get reimbursed for it, because I knew at the end of the day, what people needed was they needed to know that I was serious about growing FCA. So I would pay, let's say we didn't have the money for pizza to provide at a huddle, I would just pay for it from my paycheck. And not push a reimbursement. And so out of that, I think it's really just, I'm training the new staff guy that took over for me, and I had to encourage him in that. And I was like, look, man, I know that's going to suck sometimes, and I'm not here to take that away from you, and it's uncomfortable and it's not always fun. But if the funds aren't there, you can't force the funds to be there. But if you have an extra $10 personally and you can invest that yourself, do it, do it, because it'll turn a profit. It really will. It'll be fruitful.
Yeah, well said. I just want to wrap up with one last question. Let's reverse roles. So you're a digital fundraiser, but I want you to put yourself in the shoes of a donor. If you were a donor, what are the things that you're looking for in order to be inspired to give to the missions that are out there today?
Sure. Do you mind if I pitch it from two different perspectives?
Hey, go for it.
I'm going to pitch it from a faith-based perspective donor. A faith-based perspective donor is not necessarily always looking for the vision of what you're doing, because they see that you're just doing something and they're like, yeah, sure. Like, especially if it's like for a faith-based organization or a faith-based mission trip, they'll just, very quick investment. If it's someone not of faith, right, they want to see the vision and they want to know where their money is going towards. Take that with a grain of salt, right? Because you can have faith-based donors that do want to know where their money is. Pitch the vision is number one. Pitch the vision. Number two is transparency. I had a donor my very first day on the job. Never did I know how to run reports at the time. Like, I knew nothing about FCA, and they just straight up asked, like,
Wow.
what happened to the other guy? Who are you? That was my first introduction to my first sit-down meeting with a donor. And
Wow.
I remember I called my boss crying, and I was like, I don't know any of these answers. Don't be afraid to be transparent. If the budget's suffering and a donor asks you, tell them. If they want numbers, tell them. People care, and they do want to know where their money's going towards. So tell them. Break down every line item. If you're in a role that is permanently fundraising, such as a staff position, share the line items. And a donor is a partner.
Hmm.
That's it. If you're going on a mission trip, share the photos. Hey, thanks so much for that $20. Do you want to see my mission trip? Boom. Touch point. You may have just created a reoccurring donor. Some people won't care, and that's okay. And you can't be offended by those donors that will just write you a check and go on their way and they'll never speak to you again. You have to learn to discern those things. And I think putting myself in the shoes of a donor, there are all different kinds of donors. That could probably be its own podcast. But I think sitting on this side of the perspective, I'd say if I was going to, if someone asked me for money, what's your vision, and give me some transparency. And it's up to me what I do with that, right?
Yeah, I couldn't have wrapped it up better. You touched on some major things that are things that I definitely coach people on, which is vulnerability, like transparency, consistency, and then also just really being clear in your follow up, saying thank you. And that's just so important to this journey. I liked how you said the word touch point. It really is a touch point in the journey to hopefully get them to come back and to build a deeper relationship with them. Yeah, it's like you've been doing this for a while.
Just a little,
Yeah,
just a little.
just a decade.
Yeah. And one just final point, what you were saying just reminded me, like, let people ask the questions. Don't be afraid to not know the answer. Like, I didn't know the answer in that particular story. It's okay to
Yeah.
say you don't know. Be okay where you're at financially and sit in it with the donors. Be okay. And if the budget's suffering, you know what? It's suffering. People want to know how they can help, right? If it's thriving, keep thriving, keep raising those funds.
Yeah, I always say it as the donor is the hero in the story, right? So by being transparent, I think a lot of us are scared to do that, but I think by sharing the things that we're struggling with can actually allow a donor to come in and be a hero. It creates that problem solution, that powerful storytelling behind what you're doing. So, yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Brooke, thank you so much. This has been so incredible. There's so many things that you touched on, even as you were going into digital ads. We'll maybe have to have you on again later down the road to go deeper into that, because I know that that only just touched the surface of what that could look like. But I just want to thank you so much for being on here. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. And I just am so excited that you felt pressed to start this podcast. I wish that this podcast existed in 2013 when I started, because I really believe it's just going to help so many people in the audience that are listening that are beginning their fundraising journey. So thank you.
I'm happy to be here, and I'm excited and just grateful to learn from people like you that have been out there being so bold, raising your support over the years. So appreciate your time. Hey, listeners, if you like this, please subscribe, leave a review on the podcast. Also, I've created a resource for you if you want to start today with some quick wins. There's a resource linked below called 5 Quick Wins to Boost Your Fundraising Today. Go and get that. Until next time, thanks again for joining. We'll see you next week on Mission Money Fundraising Podcast.